Today we're going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of July. As per usual, we're going to go from least favorite to most favorite, starting with the books that I DNFed, aka did not finish. I DNFed 2 books this month, and both of those books were featured in different reading vlogs that I did this month. One of those was Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I was reading for a reading vlog that I was doing where I was reading books that are about cursed films. I did end up having another book that I really enjoyed in that vlog, another one that was kind of okay, but Silver Nitrate ended up being a DNF for me. I started that book and then I took a week off of it to go do my summer ween reading vlog, and then I came back and I still just was not super interested in it. I am hearing good reviews for this book overall, but I am hearing a lot of people say it has a really slow start and it takes a while to get into the story, and I just did not have the attention span to get through the beginning of this book and get too far into it. It just did not capture my attention, and I'm just really trying to only read books that are really hooking me right now. So it didn't work out for me, but I am hearing good things. So if you're interested in a book about cursed films, this one especially talks about Mexican horror films, and there's stuff about the occult and Nazis in it as well. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would recommend checking out other reviews and still giving it a chance. Other book that I DNF'd this month was Lone Women by Victor LaValle. I picked this book up during my summer ween reading vlog, and I gave this one a pretty good chance. I read like 80 to 100 pages of it, and I again just wasn't super intrigued with it. The setup of this one is you're following this woman, and right at the beginning she is walking away from the dead bodies of her parents, and she is leaving the house, and she is taking this big trunk with her. This is set in like the 1800s, I believe, so it is a historical horror book as well, and a lot of the intrigue that is being developed in the beginning is wondering what she has in this trunk that she's carrying with her, and she just starts encountering all these different people in her journey. When I wasn't getting super intrigued with it, I decided to look up spoilers for what happens in the book, and I realized it just wasn't going to be the type of story for me. Didn't really sound like something I would have enjoyed even if I would have pushed all the way through. But again, check out other reviews if this is one that you're interested in and want to still give it a chance. Now let's talk about the books that I actually did complete this month. I did have 2 books that I gave 2-star ratings to. These were books that just didn't really work for me, although I did like the ideas of both of them. The first one is Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. I read this book in the reading vlog that I did reading cursed film horror books. This one was the outlier because it's not a conventional cursed film type of book, although it did kind of fit into the grouping of that. Mr. Magic is a story about this group of people who were on this TV show when they were children. It was a children's program called Mr. Magic, but none of them can really remember the show, and there is no existing evidence of the show existing, and people will talk about it on forums and Reddit and around the internet, and it's just this like elusive thing that is in a lot of people's collective consciousness, but there's no actual evidence it existed, and it's kind of like a Mandela effect sort of situation where everyone kind of agrees it happened, but no one can really trace it actually happening. The main character you're following in this story is now 38 years old. It is a long time since she left her childhood behind, and she particularly has absolutely no memory of this experience until a couple of her former co-stars end up finding her and getting her involved in this reunion that they're doing, and then that kind of starts to trigger these memories back for her, and things start to feel vaguely familiar. Once they all get together, weird things start to happen again as they start to talk about the show, and that is the setup of the story. I did think this was a very, very interesting concept, especially once I completed the book and realized that Kirsten White was really telling a very personal story of her own religious deconstruction throughout this story. But ultimately, a lot of the book felt very abstract to me. It was very hard to feel immersed in. At some points, I just felt very confused about what I was even reading. And then the direction that it went in the end and the way that everything wrapped up just wasn't particularly satisfying to my personal taste. So this one ended up not being a super successful win for me, although I am still interested in the stories Kirsten White tells because I did find Hyde to be interesting, which I think I gave a 3-star from her when I read that last year. And then I love The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, which is a very different type of story that I read from her 2-ish years ago, I believe. That was a 5-star for me. So she's an author who's definitely still on my radar, but it is very interesting to see the different types of stories that she tells and the different types of genres that she plays in. My other 2-star read was unfortunately my book club pick for the month for my members book club, which was Stone Cold Fox Fox by Rachel Collar Croft. I think the main thing that set me up to not enjoy this one is the expectations that I had going into it being wildly different from what the story actually was. I was very much anticipating this to be a very fast-paced, very twisty cat and mouse style thriller, but ultimately this is more of a slow-paced drama type of book that has some minor thriller elements towards the end of the book. This is this author's debut novel. She is apparently a screenwriter who I guess writes movies and maybe TV shows. I haven't actually looked into anything that she's done before, so I don't know exactly what kinds of stuff she's responsible for in Hollywood writing, but this was her debut novel, and I do think it was a well-written story. The main character in this has a strong voice, and I do think this author has potential to tell some interesting stories, but this one just did not work out for me. The premise of this one is you're following this main character, B, who is the daughter of a con woman. She was raised by this woman who just looked at men as disposable and would con them and take all their money. So B grew up in that environment watching her mother be like that. And now B is conning a man herself. She meets this rich man named Colin who she enters a relationship with and is trying to very quickly lock down a marriage with. But B also kind of doesn't want to be like her mother. She's trying to stray away from that path of conning. And so I think that's why she's trying to settle down with one man versus conning a million different men. But ultimately, she's still conning him, and she meets her foe in his friend Gail, who very much is in love with Colin and very much does not want to let B infiltrate into this rich family. So the book is pitched as a sort of cat and mouse game between Gail and B, but for a lot of the book, honestly, not a lot really happens other than vague threats and not a lot of follow-up. But towards the very end of the book, it gets very exciting. The thrills start to happen, the stakes start to rise, and there's a couple little twists and reveals that come in as well. It just takes so long to get there that it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So that's why it ended up being a 2-star for me. But I do think I would read from this author again. I would just maybe be a little more cautious of looking into reviews and understanding what type of book it's going to be. Next up is a book that I got to read an ARC of. I received an ARC through NetGalley from the publisher, and I was very, very highly anticipating this one, especially recently. When I first heard it was coming out, I wasn't that intrigued by it, but I started hearing a lot of really, really good early reviews. But unfortunately, it did not live up to the hype for me. And that is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I ended up giving this book a 3-star rating, so I did think it was good. I did have a good time with it, but it just wasn't great for me. And there were a couple things that knocked the rating down a little bit for me. Similar to Stone Cold Fox, I was expecting this to be a very fast-paced, twisty cat and mouse style thriller, but it was a slower burn, a slower build, and it took a little bit longer to get there than I wanted, which is what knocked the points down for me a bit. When I'm reading a cat and mouse game thriller, I want it to be like they are always a step ahead of one another, and you're learning things and you're going back and you're seeing things from a different perspective, and it's very, very, you know, push and pull. I like to see the push and pull dynamic a lot. There's going to be a book I talk about later in the video that I think did that really successfully, but this one was, again, just a slower kind of drama type of story that builds before you get into the twists and the reveals. The premise of this book is very compelling, and it does hook you very fast and make you intrigued to figure out what is going to go on between these characters. You're following Alex and Josie. Alex is a successful podcaster, and Josie is kind of just a random woman off the block. They end up running into each other at a restaurant, and they are both celebrating, I think it's their 40th birthday or some year in their 40s, and they find out they were born the same day in the same place, and they're like, oh my goodness, we're birthday twins, how fun. You think that's going to be it, and they kind of merge their separate ways, but they end up coming back together, and Josie pitches Alex on the fact that they should do a podcast together exploring their stories. Alex likes to do a lot of podcasts following women's stories after they've gone through some dramatic life change, but Josie pitches to Alex that she is preparing to go through a dramatic life change, and she thinks it would be a very compelling story to tell in a podcast together. And so they start working on it together. They go through the podcast, and I don't even remember how much the synopsis reveals, so I'm not going to say too much more than that, but basically things go wrong between these two women. I will say with the way that the end of the book really picks up and gets more exciting and pulls you in more, right when I finished reading, I felt like it deserved a higher rating than a 3 because of all of the fresh stuff right at the end. But if I look at the book holistically, it evens out to about a 3 for me. I have read from Lisa Jewell in the past. I've read several books from her, and she's just not an author that I find myself gravitating to when I see her new releases are coming out. Like I said, this one I wasn't even that excited about, but I heard people giving it good reviews, so I wanted to give it a chance. But I think ultimately Lisa Jewell's books usually end up evening out around like a 3.5 star for me, maybe with an outlier here or there. All that to say, if you've seen the early reviews too and you're excited for it, still pick it up, still give it a chance. I thought it was a good book. It just wasn't a great book for me. The next 3 books that I have to talk about were all 4-star books, and I read them all in the same reading blog. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit quickly because you can go see my full thoughts and experiences with these books in that reading blog. But the reading blog I'm talking about is my Summerween reading blog, where I read these 3 books and they were all 4-star. I don't know how this happens for me. Last Summerween I read 2 books, they were both 4 stars. This Summerween I read 3 books and they were all 4 stars, and then I had a DNF, but I don't count that because I didn't finish the book. But the 3 books that I read in that video were Come Tumbling Down by Shauna McGuire, I Will Find You by Harlan Coben, and Moon of the Crusted Snow, which I read through Scribd or my Libby app. I can't remember, but I read an ebook of that. I'll start with this one since it's on the screen. Moon of the Crusted Snow is a post-apocalyptic type of story, but it's a quiet apocalypse type of horror book. It's not action-packed zombies, post-apocalyptic viruses, crazy things happening. It is, you are following an indigenous community on the reservation as they are finding out that the world is kind of collapsing around them very slowly because they are more isolated from the city, and they really unite and figure out how to be self-sustaining in their community, and they really take care of each other, and you're watching that form for a lot of the book. But then some outsiders do come into the community, and that creates some increased tensions, and the end of the book gets a little bit more action-y, maybe, I guess is a way to describe it, with where it goes. But for the most part, it's a very slow book. It is more of a literary fiction feel, but very much with threads of horror throughout because, you know, outsiders are coming in, and also just the unsettling atmosphere of knowing the world is kind of ending around you, not knowing if that is imminent or if things will return to normal in a couple weeks. Very much feels familiar to how things felt at the beginning of COVID. But overall, I thought this was a great book, really well written, really well done, incredible atmosphere. The only thing that held it back from a 5 for me was the pacing for personal preferences, but thought it was really well done. And apparently there is a sequel coming out soon, which I may or may not be picking up. Next is Come Tumbling Down by Shauna McGuire. This is the 4th or 5th book in the Wayward Children series. I never remember which number I'm on, but this is a quest story, and that is why it did not get a 5 for me. Again, it was a pacing thing with this book. Quest stories just aren't my favorite, and especially the way this one built. Like the first half and the second half felt very separate, but I still love these characters. I still love revisiting these worlds, and this one especially was focused on Jack and Jill, who are some of my favorite characters in the series, so loved it. I always love Shauna McGuire's Wayward Children series. Even if they're not 5 stars, I have a great time with them, and I am very excited to continue in the rest of the series. And then I Will Find You by Harlan Coben. This was my first Harlan Coben book. I have watched adaptations of his books that are TV shows. I've seen several of those, and I usually find them to be a good time, so I did want to try out one of his books, and this was the newest one, so it's just the one I decided to start with. In the story, you're following a man who is in prison for murdering his son, but he says he didn't do it, and it is a story of his journey into proving that he did not kill his son and seeking redemption for that. It's very fast-paced and action-packed. I don't remember exactly why it wasn't a 5-star for me in this very moment, but if you want to find that out exactly and what I was thinking as soon as I read it, you can see that in my Summerween reading blog. But I think it probably had to do with character development. It is a more plot-driven book, less so focused on character development, which I think is fine, but I like to have a little bit more character depth to my books. But overall, all the books I read in the Summerween vlog were great, and I would highly recommend them. And finally, the last 2 books that I read this month, neither of them got a full 5-star rating from me, but they both got very, very close. And so I think if I was just less picky, it would be a fast 5-star and I wouldn't think about it too hard. But in the moment, I was being a little more critical with them, and I gave them both a 4.5. I'm just really picky, but basically I loved both of these books and I would highly recommend them. The first is Burn the Negative by Josh Winning, which I read in my Cursed Film reading blog. This one was so much fun. It was very clearly written by someone who has loved horror films for a long time, and if you are someone who has loved horror films for a long time, I think you're really going to appreciate this one as well. In this story, you're following a woman named Laura who was a child actress in this famous movie called The Guest House from the 90s. It was a horror film, and ever since they finished the production and the filming of it, it has kind of been known as this cursed horror film because people kept dying on set, or after the fact, people who were involved in the movie kept dying, and so it's been this like mysterious, cursed, elusive 90s horror film. Now, many years later, they are deciding to remake it into a TV show, and Laura is actually now a journalist, and she gets put on assignment to come write about this TV show. She did not know it was going to be related to the guest house until she got there, and then she kind of wants to bail, but she can't really bail, and now she's just thrown into this situation again. And then bodies start hitting the floor again, things get intense, and Laura has to kind of work through the situation and try to get out of it alive. I would say this is a pretty campy horror book, so if camp is not your thing, maybe you won't like this one as much, but I love a campy horror book. It was fun, it was over the top, it was very cinematic too, especially towards the end of the book with this big explosive cinematic conclusion, and I just had so much fun with it. I think it's a really good summer book as well if you just want like a fun campy summer slasher. And again, if you love horror movies, you're gonna see so many little references to a lot of films you've probably loved before, and it just feels really familiar in the best way. And finally is The Drowning Woman by Robin Harding. I was reading this for my friend Sav's book club at her channel Riveting Reads, and by the time you are watching this video, our live show will be up. So I will link that down below if you want to go check that out and hear all of our thoughts about the book. I was not anticipating to love this book as much as I did. I have read from Robin Harding before. I have read 2 different books from her, one of which I think I gave a 3-star and the other one I think I gave a 4-star, but I kind of have thought of Robin Harding's books in my mind as being kind of like average domestic thrillers, books I could kind of recommend to anyone, books that don't necessarily give me anything super special, but that are really juicy, fun, fast-paced thrillers. But this one, I just was very surprised by. I thought it was written so well, the twists were so clever, the way the plot came together was really exciting, and I thought the characters had a lot of depth to them, so altogether it was just really, really great. The only thing that held me back from a 5-star in this one is towards the end of the book, it kind of takes a little bit of a direction that I was a little bit less interested in, so it just didn't feel like a book that I need to like scream from the top of the mountains of like, oh my god, it's a 5-star, it's wonderful, it's amazing, but it was very, very good, and it got very close to that 5-star. This is the story I was alluding to earlier in the video when I was talking about a cat and mouse thriller that I think was done very, very well. In this story, you're following a woman named Lee. She is now homeless. She is living out of her car, and one day she has it parked on the beach and she hears this woman crying, and then she watches her go out into the ocean, clearly trying to commit suicide, and Lee goes to save her and pull her out of the ocean, and then they get talking, and that really is a catalyst moment for both of them in their lives that takes them down a very interesting path together. And that's all I'm going to say. I think it is very fun to not know much about what you're getting yourself into with this one, because then you get to really experience all the twists and reveals, and I just think it was really, really clever, really well done. This is the type of book where you get to see multiple POVs, you get to see characters being a couple steps ahead or behind of one another, you get to understand scenes again in a different way, and I just really love when cat and mouse thrillers do that, and they give you dual perspectives and you're understanding different motives and you're uncovering different secrets. I just think this was a really solid, really fun time. So I'm super glad I ended up picking up with Sav for her book club, because otherwise I might have just passed up on this and not thought to pick it up, but I will definitely be keeping an eye on Robin Harding's books now because this was really, really fun. So that's it for all the books that I read in the month of July. Let me know down in the comments below how your month went in July, if you read any new favorite books, if you read any of the books that I mentioned today and what you think about them, or if I convinced you to pick up any of the books that I talked about today. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!